Night settles over the Rocky Mountains, and Aspen's thin air grows colder by the minute. Beneath a black sky, flakes of snow drift like sparks in the runway lights. The airport lies in a deep mountain valley surrounded by peaks that climb straight into the clouds. Pilots call it one of the most unforgiving approaches in America. On March 29, 2001, a sleek Gulfstream III business jet was closing in, its passengers eager to reach Aspen before nightfall, and its crew racing the last minutes of daylight. The jet had departed Los Angeles late in the afternoon. On board were 15 people, the 2 pilots, a flight attendant, and a group of passengers headed for a private party linked to the Aspen Film Festival. Spirits were high. The cabin hummed with quiet conversation and the rhythm of the engines. In the cockpit, Captain Robert Frisbee and First Officer Peter Kowalczyk monitored their climb, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. They knew Aspen's curfew rule, no landings after 6:58 p.m. local time. Miss that window and the flight must divert. The clock was ticking. From the start, weather reports painted a challenge. Light snow, low clouds, visibility falling. The mountainous terrain around Aspen left no margin for error. Instrument approaches there were precise, narrow, and unforgiving. Air traffic control updates kept shifting the picture. Ceilings dropping, snow thickening, winds swirling through the valley. Even seasoned pilots spoke carefully when talking about Aspen at night. As the Gulfstream crossed the Continental Divide, the world outside the cockpit turned gray. Clouds thickened, the mountains disappeared, and turbulence brushed the wings. In the cabin, passengers could feel the subtle jolts, but conversation continued, glasses clinking, someone laughing softly. None of them knew that the crew was already under pressure, their eyes fixed on the instrument dials and the clock running down toward the night landing cutoff. At 6:46 p.m., Denver Center cleared the flight for descent. The crew switched to Aspen approach and began threading their way through mountain valleys filled with mist. Controllers warned them that the latest weather put visibility at only 2 miles, light snow still falling. The approach chart for Aspen required 3 miles, but a special visual approach, known as the VOR DMEC, could still be attempted if the runway could be seen in time. The captain wanted to try. Inside the cockpit, tension built. The sun was gone now, the valley dim and hazy. The first officer monitored altitude call-outs while the captain focused ahead, peering through the windshield for any glimpse of lights. The passengers could see only darkness. The first officer asked, "You sure you've got the field?" The captain replied quietly, "We'll get it in sight." The seconds slipped away. At 6:56, Aspen Tower reminded them, airport closing in 2 minutes. The controllers had already advised another jet to go around. But this crew, still hopeful, pressed on. The descent path into Aspen dropped along a steep, twisting corridor hemmed in by ridges more than 10,000 feet high. Each step-down altitude had to be followed exactly. There was no room for visual shortcuts. The cockpit voice recorder later captured clipped exchanges. They called altitudes, adjusted flaps, set speed. But the pressure was unmistakable. The urgency of passengers wanting to arrive, the awareness that a missed approach meant embarrassment and an expensive diversion. Outside, flakes of snow streaked across the landing lights, erasing any clear view ahead. At 6:57 p.m., just 1 minute before curfew, the tower cleared them to land. The runway lights burned faintly through haze. The crew descended below the minimum descent altitude, still searching for the field. Then suddenly, a ground proximity warning alarm sounded. In the final seconds, the jet slammed into a hillside short of the runway, exploding into flame. The impact carved a crater into the snowy slope barely 3 miles from the airport. Everyone on board, 18 souls, was gone. Emergency crews rushed from the terminal through swirling snow. Flames lit the ridge. They could reach only twisted wreckage. The fire burned hot against the snow, and then there was silence again, the echo of the impact rolling through the valley. News of the crash swept through Aspen that night. Locals who had seen the flash on the hillside fell quiet. Within hours, investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board began arriving, hiking up through the cold darkness to document what remained. The scene told its own story, descent angle too steep, flaps and gear extended, engines producing power. The wreckage lay on a heading aligned with the runway, proof the pilots had been trying to complete the approach visually. In the following days, investigators listened to the cockpit recorder again and again. They heard stress, exhaustion, and the ticking clock. They also heard calls from passengers earlier in the flight, requests to land before the curfew, reminders that the party awaited them in Aspen. None of it was malicious, but the atmosphere of urgency was unmistakable. The crew, both experienced, had faced the impossible mixture of pressure from their clients and deteriorating weather. Interviews with controllers revealed that other pilots had chosen to divert that night. The snow showers around the valley made visual references unreliable. The Gulfstream crew had been cleared for the approach, but only if they maintained visibility. When they descended below the minimum altitude without seeing the runway, they crossed a deadly line drawn by terrain and physics. The final report would state it plainly. The probable cause was controlled flight into terrain due to the crew's descent below minimum descent altitude without the required visual cues. Contributing factors: dark night conditions, snowy weather, pressure to meet the curfew. Simple words for a chain of human decisions that ended in tragedy. In documentaries, we often talk about pilot error as if it's a momentary lapse. But here, the error unfolded slowly, shaped by schedule, reputation, and expectation. The passengers were prominent people. They expected to arrive on time. The crew wanted to deliver. Each radio call, each checklist, each glance at the clock nudged them closer to risk. It wasn't one wrong move. It was the quiet momentum of human confidence meeting the mountain's indifference. In the weeks that followed, Aspen's small community mourned. Memorials filled the news. Pilots from around the world discussed the accident, studying the terrain maps, the approach charts, the decision points. Many said they understood exactly how it could happen. The belief that the runway must be just ahead, the urge to complete the job. Others pointed to the culture of business aviation at the time, where passengers sometimes pushed for arrivals regardless of conditions. The tragedy forced changes. The FAA reviewed nighttime curfew rules, refined approach procedures, and issued guidance reinforcing adherence to published minimums. For the Gulfstream fleet, manufacturers and operators reinforced training about mountain operations and human factors. In simulator sessions, pilots replayed Aspen 2001, practicing the moment to call a missed approach even when pride and passengers said otherwise. But numbers and regulations tell only part of the story. Behind them were human voices, families waiting at the airport, rescuers climbing the slope through snow, investigators standing beside the crater under a rising sun. They described the smell of jet fuel, the faint sound of wind through the wreckage. One said, "You could see the runway lights just over the ridge." They were that close. The phrase "that close" would echo through every retelling. It captured the cruel nearness of success, the idea that only a few seconds, a few hundred feet, separated life from death. For many aviators, Aspen became a symbol, a reminder that rules exist not to restrict skill, but to guard against the illusions that weather and darkness can create. Years later, pilots flying into Aspen still remember the Gulfstream. They brief the approach with extra care, speaking of terrain, lighting, and human pressure. They know that confidence, unchecked, can turn fatal in seconds. The mountains demand humility, and the cockpit must remain a place where safety outranks schedule, always. The passengers' names are etched in memorials across the country. Friends recall their laughter on that final afternoon, unaware of the storm waiting in the valley. For the families, the official findings could not fill the silence left behind. The captain's relatives described him as a careful professional who had simply faced a situation with too many competing voices. The first officer's family said he loved flying, trusted procedure, but believed in his captain. Both had good records, thousands of flight hours, and every intention to land safely. Documentary producers later reconstructed the event minute by minute. They replayed radar tracks, synchronized radio transmissions, and modeled the cockpit environment. The visuals showed a gray blur outside the windows, the runway hidden until the final instant. Viewers could sense the weight of the decision: continue descent or go around. That single choice defined the ending. As the narrator's voice slowed, the imagery of the burning ridge faded into the stillness of a mountain dawn. Snow had stopped falling. Investigators in bright jackets moved quietly among fragments of aluminum and paper, collecting evidence before the sun melted the scene. Every crash site tells a story written in wreckage angles and instrument needles frozen in place. Here, the instruments froze on descent. confirmation that the engines still thrust forward even as the ground rushed up unseen. For years afterward, training videos used Aspen 2001 as a lesson in operational pressure. The term sounds clinical, but it describes a very human phenomenon, the narrowing of focus when a pilot wants to complete a flight under pressure. It's not recklessness, it's determination slowly overriding caution. In simulator recreations, instructors watch as pilots, knowing the story's ending, still struggle to call missed approach in time. The mountain's silhouette, invisible until too late, remains a haunting image. In the end, Aspen's deadliest crash was not about malfunction or ignorance. It was about humanity, ambition, trust, expectation, and the fragile line between confidence and danger. The official report became part of aviation history, but for those who stood in that valley, the memory never faded. On certain winter nights, when clouds hang low and the wind sweeps down from the ridges, locals say they still see the flicker of light on the hillside where the Gulf Stream fell. A reminder, silent and cold, of the price of minutes lost and decisions made too late. And so the story closes where it began, with mountains, weather, and human will. The Gulf Stream's engines had carried its passengers across half a continent, but the last 3 miles proved impossible. The lesson it left behind continues to echo through every cockpit briefing, every weather check, every cautious go-around. It says, no deadline, no client, no curfew is worth descending below the line that separates safety from tragedy. Because in aviation, as in life, the mountain never moves.